What is going on, everybody? James Hancock here. It's been nearly 2 years, but we're finally back to talk about Season 2 of House of the Dragon, and the first episode, very appropriately titled A Son for a Son, written by showrunner Ryan Condal and directed by Game of Thrones veteran Alan Taylor. Alan Taylor, I mean, he's an HBO pro going back to the days of The Sopranos, as well as Game of Thrones, but he also directed some terrible movies like Thor: The Dark World and Terminator Genesis, but when it comes to directing great episodes of either Game of Thrones or now House of the Dragon, he's an excellent choice. But when it comes to Ryan Condal, I think at this point he's got enough credit in the bank where wherever he wants to go, I will happily follow, because any fan of Fire and Blood or George R. R. Martin's overall books is going to have specific scenes or beats where they want those scenes captured perfectly or those beats really emphasized. But with Season 1, Ryan Condal proved that he could embellish certain ingredients from the book Fire and Blood and actually in some ways kind of make it his own and make an improvement. Like the character of Viserys was very underwritten in the book, or written in a very different way, in a kind of a more shallow way. He was just kind of a big, kind of chubby buffoon, and they imbued him with so much honor and integrity. It really made him the star of Season 1 in a lot of ways. So I'll be very curious to see what Ryan Condal does with Season 2, but we're off to a very good start. And holy shit, Team Black and hashtag Team Black. I'm rooting for Team Black. They got a point on the scoreboard. I mean, maybe not as significant a point on the scoreboard as killing Luke and his dragon at the end of Season 1. Obviously, anytime you kill a dragon rider, that changes the balance of things, because there are only a finite number of dragons on either side, finite number of dragon riders, and obviously Team Green has the benefit of all that high tower wealth and the ability to raise large land armies, and Team Black has the advantage of more dragons. They don't have Vagar, but they have more dragons, and they have the incredible navy of Corlys Velaryon, a.k.a. the Sea Snake. And yeah, it's going to be very interesting seeing in these initial blows who can seek little advantages over the others, while some people on both sides are still urging caution and restraint. I was listening to an interview with Ryan Condal over on the House of the Dragon podcast, or I think that's what it's called. In any event, it was like a 30-minute interview with him. And he said, in the world of George R. R. Martin, in the world of Game of Thrones, in the world of Fire and Blood, basically dragons are thermonuclear war, where you have mutually assured destruction. But there are not a lot of people who have seen dragons fight. Like, at this point, once the Targaryens actually invaded the Seven Kingdoms, I believe at this point in the history, prior to Aemon killing Luke, there had been only one dragon battle when Maegor the Cruel killed the rightful heir to the throne. And speaking of Maegor, we got to see a lot of Maegor's holdfast in this episode, but more on Maegor in a second. But because so few people know just how horrible it can be when dragons are actually burning castles and burning cities and that sort of thing, a lot of people are kind of eager to march to war, not realizing just how horrible it can be. But obviously, all you have to do is visit the castle of Harrenhal, which was destroyed at the beginning of Aegon's conquest, to see everything you need to know, where one man and one dragon, Balerion the Black Dread, took out the strongest castle in all the Seven Kingdoms. And who knows, maybe we will see that in action if the prequel to House of the Dragon about Aegon the Conqueror gets completed. I think right now they're just writing it. I know that A Night of Seven Kingdoms, the show about Dunk and Egg, that is actually filming right now. I sincerely, genuinely hope that they're not diluting the brand. Like, as long as you have writers like Ryan Condal, then I feel like you can basically adapt all of George R. R. Martin's books and have full confidence that they're going to do a good job. But as we've seen with so many other franchises in recent years, anytime you have second-rate storytellers adapting a great author's work, well, then things can go poorly very, very quickly. But at a minimum, we have one really good episode from Season 2 to discuss and sink our teeth into, and I'm just going to go through it blow by bloody blow, or at least as much as they were willing to give us. It was heartbreakingly short, and sadly, we only have 8 episodes this season. The season finale is going to be on August 4th, but on this channel, I plan on doing weekly breakdowns every single Sunday for the rest of the summer. Also, I should add on this channel, I'm not going to do any fan theories or predictions and that sort of thing, because I've read Fire and Blood now 3 times, or I've read it twice, listened to it once, and I know more or less the roadmap of where we're going to go. Like, they might zig and zag a little bit between the points, but I feel like the major story beats Ryan Condal is more or less going to stick to. And so if you want to know what's going to happen over the next couple of seasons, it's all there on the page, and it's riveting reading. Some people don't like Fire and Blood because it's written in broad strokes as opposed to kind of more like scene by scene, like a novel. But for me, if you just want raw information about the history of this world, Fire and Blood is the absolute motherlode. So once again, I don't do theories. I'm only here to assess the degree to which this is a great adaptation of the book, and when they differ from the book, like, are those changes warranted or interesting or exciting? And hopefully people will enjoy this commentary over the rest of the summer. But let's get into the very first thing from this episode, new title sequence. I think one of the areas of kind of mutual agreement or complaint in season 1 was that the title sequence was, it was perfectly adequate, it was perfectly serviceable, but not necessarily all that memorable. And very quickly, this new title sequence started to grow on me. I thought it was absolutely fucking gorgeous, but it might take a few episodes before I completely, totally embrace it. I'm still of the opinion that the Game of Thrones theme song should not have been used at all, that it should have been a new score for a new story, but that's just one person's opinion. But as soon as the title sequence was over, I immediately found myself standing in front of my TV. There's certain shows where I have to watch them standing up, and there's certain shows where I can kind of lean back and eat a fistful of edibles and just zone out. House of the Dragons was one of those shows where I watched standing up, and Succession last year was one of those shows where I watched standing up, where I'm just like, just like feed me, like give me the story and the emotions and the experiences that I crave. And I think more or less this episode did deliver, especially when they took us back to the familiar terrain of Winterfell, where we see Jace is trying to rally some of the forces behind his mother's cause. And one of the wonderful, beautiful things about the Starks, they might be a little rigid and they might be a little old school, but they remember their oaths. And they were there when they swore an oath to uphold or to adhere to Viserys' wishes that Rhaenyra would end up being his heir. And so they're not going to bend, they're not going to break. And I like how they added a little reference to years back when King Jaehaerys and his queen came to visit came to visit Winterfell, and they were unable to fly their dragons over the wall. And the queen actually tries several times to get her dragon to go over, but refuses. And it was an interesting little tease of the war and the battles to come much later on. But I loved how which Stark was it? Torkin? I can't remember which Stark. Anyway, Ned's great grandfather. He talks about how they built a 700-foot wall not to keep out wildlings and bad weather, to keep out other things. And I thought that was a very ominous reference to the horrors that lurk beyond the wall. But I also like seeing how we already know that Stark is willing to send a lot of Greybeards to help in the war in the South, because the Greybeards, anytime the winter is coming, oftentimes the Greybeards will go out hunting and never return, just so that there are fewer mouths to feed. But if they can march south and die defending Rhaenyra's claim, as opposed to just dying to cold and starvation, well, then that works just fine for them. So they are savage, and trust me, if they adapt the scene where the Greybeards appear even half as well as it's depicted in the book, everybody's going to be thrilled and delighted when they see all these just true fucking savages from the north coming down to participate in this war between the Greens and the Blacks. But one of my only complaints about this episode was the way they depicted Daemon, as he's basically kind of twiddling his thumbs, like eager to take action in the absence of Rhaenyra, because Rhaenyra, in a state of grief, has decided to basically go flying and looking for remains of Luke. And ultimately, she is successful. She finds one of the wings of his dragon that's been captured by some fishermen. So they at least have something to burn at Luke's funeral. But we see Daemon basically kind of acting just like, basically acting a lot like Aegon, where he's like trying to order Rhaenys about, and she's, if only you were king, blah, blah, blah. But basically he tries to order his, I guess she would be his aunt or his first cousin, trying to order her into battle alongside him. He wants to go kill Vhagar then and there. And that's a complete departure from the book. Because in the book, when this war starts, it's one of Daemon's finest hours, where he basically cooks up like 3 or 4 things to do right at once to get an early advantage for the Blacks. And it shows him at his most decisive and his most lethal and at his most efficient. And I just thought it was kind of a betrayal of his character, showing him be kind of silly and ineffectual, but at least we get to see him putting in this plot, or organizing this plot involving, blood and cheese, which ultimately ends up being more or less successful, at least as far as like a son for a son is concerned. But we also get some interesting scenes with the sea snake where we see him trying to restore his own ship, which luckily was able to be retrieved from the stepstones after he basically got his throat slashed in a battle in the previous season. But he thanks the man who dragged him out of the water. And he basically is eager to set sail and help with the blockade because for the time being, as long as the Valarian fleet is blockading King's Landing can't get much needed supplies like salt for salting meats for the winter, or all the ingredients that go into making all their the scorpions and all the armor and weapons that they're going to need. Like a blockade of King's Landing is incredibly effective, and so we see that within King's Landing on the small council, they're basically trying to figure out, like, between the Lannisters and the Greyjoys, can they put together a big enough fleet to break that blockade? But we'll see what plans get put in motion when it comes to the blockade. One of the most interesting things that happens is with the actually, how can I say this without giving away spoilers? Let's just say the blockade is not going to be a little side note in this overall war. That's a major factor, and you will see a resolution one way or another in the episodes or seasons to come. But at a very partisan moment as we were seeing the initial shots of King's Landing, because we saw a lot of green on display with the various guards walking around, and I immediately thought, like, fuck you, Team Green, like, Team Black's coming to get you. And obviously, when it comes to the writers of the show, they try to more or less be impartial and focus on the interesting characters on both sides. And there are interesting characters on both sides. Like, I think on the side of the Greens, Otto Hightower, he's a master schemer. Aemon Targaryen is fucking hell on wheels, and he rides the world's greatest dragon. And I think Alicent is slowly but surely turning into secretly like the biggest porn star in all of King's Landing. Like when we first are reintroduced to her character, actually maybe not reintroduced, but one of her early major scenes, we see Kristen Cole going down on her. And initially I was like, who's going down? Is that going to be Clubfoot? Like, what's going on? But then it's going to be a source of jealousy. But then toward the end of the episode, if you don't mind my jumping ahead, when Queen Helena walks in, like basically to announce that her son has had his head sawn off, we see Alicent riding Cole like a goddamn porn star. I was like, all right, you spent years and years and years making love for, the propagation of the king's line, and at least now she's getting some payback and getting to enjoy a nice screw from time to time for pleasure. And, bless her little heart. I'm all for it. But Alicent's actions this episode are not exclusively limited to making love to Kristen Cole. She's also worried that her sons are going to increasingly stop listening to her. I mean, Aegon, we all know that Aegon has, giant character flaws. Even for a Targaryen, he's pretty bad. Like, he's not as bad as Maegor the Cruel, but he's pretty bad. And he's young, and he's impulsive, and he wants to take action. And we see how there's a rift growing between him and Otto. Aegon's young enough and headstrong enough. He doesn't like being told no. Like he's a fucking toddler basically, and toddlers don't like being told no. Toddlers like to say no. And we see how he's very eager to unleash his brother Aemond and Vhagar on the blockade or on his enemies. And basically, Alicent is urging restraint. She doesn't want them to rule over a burning kingdom. What she really wants is for Rhaenyra to bend the knee and for her son Aegon to rule in peace. And on the other side, on Team Black, Rhaenyra is feeling some similar impulses. Obviously, like, Daemon's ready to be the attack dog. He's ready to be let off his chain and ready to start, kicking some serious ass. And it seems like everybody recognizes that, like, the choke point of the Riverlands is going to be a major factor. Like, whoever controls Harrenhal will be able to control when and if reinforcements come from the Riverlands, and especially when and if reinforcements will come from the Vale, which Jace has gotten on their side for Team Black, and also whether or not the North will get involved in the war. So all roads are leading to the Greens and the Blacks having a major battle around Harrenhal. But something tells me that Alicent is going to be urging much less restraint once she learns about the horrendous death of her grandson, Jaehaerys. It's funny, thinking about her as a grandmother, she's sexy beyond words, and she doesn't look like a grandmother, but she is a grandmother nonetheless. But more on baby Jaehaerys in a sec. Let me get back to my notes. Where am I? Boom, boom, boom. Oh, and we also see that in the Red Keep that they are preparing all the scorpions, but they have a false alarm when they see Vhagar. But obviously, everybody's got dragons on the brain. But while everybody else is thinking about dragons and an invasion from the sky, we see how Helena has a premonition about rats. And all of her premonitions, that's more or less been kind of like fabricated for the show. But I do think it's an interesting detail where every once in a while she'll say something which nobody pays attention to, but it always turns out to be true. Like in season 1, she made a reference to how Aemond was going to have to close an eye first before he became a dragon rider, and everybody just kind of ignored her. But sure enough, Aemond did have to close an eye to become a dragon rider. But we also see how Aegon is doing just all sorts of annoying things, like bringing his dipshit son Jaehaerys to meetings of the small council, and he starts distracting Thailand. And Aegon basically says, "Why don't you give him like a pony ride or a horseback ride or blah blah blah." Anyway, Aegon, he's going to be a lousy king, but he's a lousy king who also happens to ride Sunfire. Like everybody's worried about Vhagar. Sunfire, first and foremost, is the most beautiful dragon that's basically ever lived. I mean, George R. R. Martin devotes like paragraphs upon paragraphs to just how gorgeous Sunfire is. And Sunfire is not a small little dragon. Sunfire is more or less basically about as big as like Caraxes. And if and when Aegon and Aemon take to the sky side by side, they are going to be a force to be fucking reckoned with. But I have a feeling, I'm going to say this without spoilers, let's just say that there may or may not be a scene involving the two of them, which would make a perfect scene for the season finale if the writers choose to go that direction. But as far as palace intrigue is concerned, we see that Clubfoot is starting to exploit some of the tensions between Otto Hightower and Aegon. Obviously, Clubfoot, what he lacks in physical skills or intimidation, he more than makes up for with his cleverness and his craftiness and his plotting and scheming. And it'll be interesting to see how things evolve between Clubfoot and Otto and Aegon and Alicent. Yeah, like Team Green, they might have a lot of advantages. Like they have all the symbols of power. Like they have the Iron Throne. They have Aegon the Conqueror's sword, the Blackfire. They've got Aegon's original crown. Like they got all the trappings of power, and obviously they have a male-born successor, which in a male-dominated society carries a lot of weight with most people. But in spite of having all those advantages, there's a lot of conflict within them. So, yeah, it's what I love about this is how it's all just a big, giant family pissing contest. Like, we think about the Greens and the Blacks, but it's all the same goddamn family. And even within the Greens and the Blacks, we see people constantly undermining one another. So, yeah, this civil war is ugly and is only going to get uglier as we proceed. But there are the occasional moments of tenderness, like when Rhaenyra returns from looking for Luke. I love how when she walks into her own small council meeting, Daemon walks up to her, and they have that great move where they always kind of touch foreheads together. And I love that bit of intimacy between the two of them. And he asks her if she's found what she needed to find. And she says she wants Aemon Targaryen. And so she basically gives permission for a son. However, once Daemon travels to King's Landing and starts plotting and scheming alongside the White Worm and meeting up with one of his old gold cloaks, because remember, at one time, Daemon did run the gold cloaks for his brother Viserys. But as we quickly realize, like, once you unleash Blood and Cheese is the rat catcher, Blood is the member of the gold cloaks, like, they don't really know what they're doing, and like they don't really know where to find Aemon. And so at a certain point, they just decide we just need to kill like a son, which leads them to Maegor's Holdfast. And I hope at some point we'll either get a flashback episode showing just how horrible Maegor the Cruel truly was, or they'll save that for the Aegon the Conqueror show, because Maegor the Cruel he's the son of Visenya, the older of the two sisters that Aegon the Conqueror is married to, but he's not the firstborn heir. And anyway, more on Maegor the Cruel down the road. But when he built Maegor's Holdfast, he added all these secret passages, making it incredibly difficult to navigate unless you are a rat catcher who knows all those secret passages. So that I thought it was cool, like, and the seasons can be more or less concerned with, like, armies in motion and castles and, like, conquest and that sort of thing. That we actually got to slow down and almost like a little Dungeons and Dragons module, seeing two people sneaking through the tunnels of King's Landing, watching Aegon drinking with his friends and all that kind of stuff. But we got to see, like, an interesting glimpse behind the scenes in the Red Keep. But when they finally found Helena, I was initially annoyed because I worried they were going to tap the brakes with the scene, because the scene's depicted much differently in the book, where basically they ask Helena to pick which of the children is going to be killed. And the kids are awake, making eye contact with her. She points at one, they kill the other. She freaks out, and her mind is shattered, and just like the guilt, like she can never live with the guilt of pointing at one child, having the other one killed, and then having to basically like have that child looking at her imploringly, like from that point on, like, you picked me to be killed, blah blah blah. But in any event, they had the children sleeping. I was like, that's kind of chicken shit. You're tapping the brakes. Like, the scene's not as hardcore as it is in the book. But one thing the show added that you can't have in the book is the sound effect of Blood and Cheese sawing off the head of Jaehaerys. And I don't think anybody's going to miss Jaehaerys. I mean, Jaehaerys seemed like a pretty annoying little kid, and he probably would have been an even more of a tyrant than his father Aegon. But that was pretty gnarly. Just the idea of sawing off the head of a little boy in response to the swallowing of yet another little boy in the season finale of season 1. So both sides now have done horrible things to each other. And while I think in the teaser we see how Rhaenyra is basically chastising Daemon for undermining her claim due to these horrible actions. But this is one of those things where this war is going to get bloody, it's going to get horrible, and these are the least of the crimes that are going to be committed on both sides. Cities are going to burn, family members are going to betray family members, there's going to be more deception and lies and betrayal than people know what to do with, and everybody in the Seven Kingdoms is going to suffer as a result, and it's just going to be pure bloody mayhem for the next couple of years, and I, for one, am excited to eat it all up. In any event, the teaser for next week's episode looks absolutely fucking killer. It looks even better than this week's episode. I have a feeling things are going to start to escalate dramatically. Because remember, we only have 8 episodes. They got to kind of move things along story-wise. But I look forward to hearing what everybody has to say down in the comments below. Also, I have one question for people out there who have read Fire and Blood. And I got to phrase the question carefully to avoid spoilers. But there was a character by the name of Hugh, who is a blacksmith that is introduced at one point. He's basically filing a petition for their services to be paid for in advance as they're making these scorpions. There is a Hugh later in the Fire and Blood story. Is this basically like a TV show introducing the character early so it won't seem like such a surprise when he's introduced later on in the story? But I don't know if that's the same Hugh as the Hugh that will play a major role in the Dance of the Dragons later on. So if you're a big, giant George R. R. Martin nerd, let me know your theories down below. But that's all I've got for now. Hope everybody enjoyed the episode as much as I did. I just love having this show back in my life. It's been a very strange summer at the box office in terms of movies, but at least we have 8 episodes of House of the Dragon to look forward to. Like the fact that we have House of the Dragon returning tonight, and we also have the DLC for Elden Ring, Shadows, was it The Shadow of the Erd Tree? I always fuck up the title, but anyway, the DLC for Elden Ring coming on Thursday night. If you're a fantasy fan, to have a DLC for one of the greatest fantasy games ever made, and to have a show adapted from a really cool fantasy book all in 1 week, it's a very good time to be a fantasy fan. So I'm just enjoying the feeling of being very well fed this week. But let me know what you think down in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, hitting that notification bell, and hit the all, because otherwise you won't get the notifications. But I can't thank you enough for watching. Hope everybody has a great week, but more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.